All right, hello everyone. Eric Marks, findingmiddle-earth.com, and today I'm finally doing another video on the On1 Photo RAW processor, and I'm going to be processing another Fujifilm X-T2 RAW file. Ever since I did that first video on On1 versus Lightroom, I've gotten probably 300 plus emails begging me to do another one. So sorry it's taken me so long. Here it is. I'm going to do another one to test out On1 Photo RAW. This time I'm not going to compare it to Lightroom because it's just there are a lot of differences and each RAW processor processes differently. So we're just going to focus on On1 Photo RAW and how the end result looks on an X-T2 RAW file. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Let's look into the library here. So you might remember these photos from my landscape photography vlog. I think it was the last one I did, where I found that weird rain boot on the shore line of the lake here. Let's do, here we go, this long exposure here. Yeah, it was weird. I was walking along the shoreline, and I couldn't find any, good foreground, any cool composition. So I found this little rain boot down here, and I thought it looked at least good enough to take the shot because the clouds are really nice. So before we get started, I know you're going to want to know what the info on the shot is. So shot it with the Fujifilm X-T2, the 10-24 f4 lens. I was at f9, 3.2 seconds, ISO 200. That is all she wrote. So let's hop into the develop module here. Now, if you watched my last video where I was working with On1 Photo RAW, it was right after they released the software. So the software was very new. They were still releasing updates and bug fixes and all these things. And so I really didn't like the contrast, and I really didn't like the highlight slider. The highlight slider was just awful. And then the contrast kind of burnt out the highlights, and those two together were just no good. So I have just now updated the very newest update. All right, not the Mac. What am I doing? On1 Photo RAW. There we go. So I'm on version 11.1.0.3613. Okay, just so you guys know the version I'm on at this point. And we'll go ahead and click OK. So I'm going to start with the highlight slider and see if that has been improved. And already I can tell you it has. Much better than last time. So now this exposure that I took wasn't quite dark enough to get all the detail anyway, but it's actually giving me detail instead of smushing everything into a gross white blob like it did last time. But because my exposure wasn't quite dark enough to get that dynamic range, I'm going to leave it a little overexposed. Just a little bit, so that I think it looks better that way. All right, so the big thing is the shadow slider. Let's crank that up. So it's still just mind-boggling and unbelievable every time how much shadow recovery On1 Photo RAW gives you. That is probably my favorite part. However, the Fujifilm RAW files and a lot of other cameras aren't quite good. When you really spread the entire range of dynamic range out from the sensor and you try to dig out every shadow, a lot of times it can lose image quality. So let's do a quick detail test. Wow, I'm actually pleasantly surprised right now. I didn't process this before I recorded, so you're seeing my reaction in real time, and I can tell you there's a ton of detail. You can see the cracks and all the textures in the boot, and that's with the shadows cranked up at 100%. That is actually mind-blowing because this was pretty darn underexposed before. We started here, okay? You can barely see anything. And we'll watch that rise up. And boom. That's pretty wild. So I can tell you that if I was in Lightroom and I was able to dig that kind of light out of the boot, there's no way it would be this sharp. This is really, really nice. So On1 Photo RAW, great job so far for your updates and for the detail that you're rendering in the RAW files, because that is surprising. To get the extra bit of detail in the RAW files, normally I'll have to go to Photoshop, and then I'll go to the NIC software and do some of the NIC sharpener or a high pass filter or something. But that is quite phenomenal. So great job there. All right, so the detail check is good, highlight slider is good, shadow's good. Let's change the white balance because I was shooting, I think, in custom Kelvin, and it was not working well. So let's add some warmth back in. Let's add a lot more warmth. Really crank up those warm colors. Add just a little bit of magenta in there. I see some pink colors back in here. And then we'll add vibrance. All right. And saturation. Now, if you know me, I hate saturation sliders. Most of them are horrible. On1 Photo RAW, ever since the past few updates, their saturation is actually quite good. It doesn't leave the normal, like, oversaturated halos around textured areas. That's the worst thing about saturation, is normally that's what it does. Normally it blows out the highlights and it puts a little, like, line, like a haloed line around textures. But as I'll zoom in back here, as I'm doing this, you can see, let me increase the saturation even more. You can see it's just making the colors hot, but it's not really, you know, ruining the textures. It's not putting a halo around it. So anyway, I'm going to leave this about maybe 10% or so. All right. So just subtle. Okay. So the color is good. Saturation is good. You know, this isn't some 5-star image that I would ever put in my portfolio, but you know, it's fun to play around with. So, I wish I was able to find a better foreground, because the clouds were really nice that night. So what do I want to do next? I want more contrast. So let's make this contrast slider work for us a little bit. Wow, that's also much nicer than it was last time. I will say that for sure. And one thing I will say about On1 Photo RAW, just a little bit of contrast goes a long way. I mean, 15%, 10% to 15% is all you need on most images, because even that darkened down our shadows quite a bit. So let's just leave it about 12%. And I still think it needs more contrast, but and I think it needs more color in the clouds too. So to get that, you can actually darken everything instead of just keep adding contrast. So one of my favorite things to use in On1 Photo RAW is the filters. So let's go over here to the effects module down here, and here's filters. So much like the saturation slider, I don't use filters in any other RAW processor, but there's one that I've kind of fallen in love with in On1, which is called Darker, right here. All right, and actually we'll go ahead and heart that so we can make it a favorite. Yeah, it's called Darker. So you can see it really works on the colors and adds contrast, but it also, you know, dramatically darkens the image a little too much. So I love what it did to the cloud reflections here. I love what it did to the clouds everywhere except the sun. And it just added a little more texture and drama to the scene. So the nice thing is we have this like layer here, this tone enhancer layer, and we can actually mess with the filter. So we can add some shadows back into it if we want to. All right, let's check the detail again. Incredible, just incredible. It's amazing that this isn't falling apart yet. I'm genuinely surprised about that. So that is pretty incredible. Add a little bit more contrast, not a whole lot, just a little bit. All right, we'll definitely crank the exposure up a bit. And let me get my histogram up here. Yeah, so I'm blowing some highlights. That's okay. But let's take the whites down a little bit and the blacks up. Maybe, let's take the blacks down actually. All right, and then what's great is you can press B on your keyboard and you can get a brush. All right, so we can brush out certain percentages of opacity, and you can paint out or paint in. Obviously, we're going to paint out because everything is already painted in pretty much here. So we're going to paint out. And if we want to take away anything, it's probably going to be some of the sky. So let's make the brush nice and big. We'll feather it all the way nice and soft. And I'll just paint a little bit out of the sky. That'll give us a little more brightness. And we'll paint a little bit out of the sun area, because I do want it a little bit brighter around the sun. That makes sense, right? Okay, so we'll do that. And then overall, we'll take the exposure down a bit now that we brightened up the sky. All right, because the sky should be brighter than the foreground. That makes sense to our brain because the sky has the sun in it right now. So obviously it's going to be brighter than our foreground. Crank those shadows a little bit more. Man, I'm loving this shadow slider. That just solves all my problems here. Okay, so that is nice. Dig into that. Let's see if there's another filter. Well, one great thing is you can stack these things. So let's see, contrast, decrease contrast, highlights darker. What does highlights darker do? Let's see what that does. No, I don't like that. Let's undo that. Do a Command Z. So, okay, I think that's okay. Let's go back to the develop settings. All right, and let's take the exposure down again overall. We will, what else do I want to do? Let's do show more, and let's do some curves. All right, I'm gonna add a nice little S curve here. So let's take that down a bit, pop that up a bit, just a little bit. All right, I'm watching the curve really carefully. Just a bit, add a little bit more contrast. All right, we'll do show more again, and I think this photo might actually work well with a little bit of a vignette. All right, so let's do the size of the vignette. Let's do edges. Let's do big softy, and let's do that one, and then we'll just play with it from there. We'll change that. All right, we'll change that. The feathering's 100%, which is great, and I think that's enough there because that adds a little bit more contrast. We'll do show more again, and let's see what glow is. I've actually never played with glow, believe it or not, so this is new for all of us here. Let's do lighter, see what that does. All right, darker. Ooh, that's nice and moody. Let's take away the amount a little bit. Just subtly add that in there. All right, I actually kind of like that. It's not bad, not bad. Then let's do sharpening, all right? And let's watch it take effect. So let's zoom into this boot. And here we go. So sharpening, you can do a fixed focus, which is actually pretty cool. Print, so I don't know if you guys remember On1, there was a photo before, there was a software before On1 Photo RAW called On1 Resize. And that is what I use for all of my large printing. That's part of my printing workflow. I have a video here on the channel, which is all about my whole workflow of how to prep your photos for print. And On1 Resize is what I use. What's nice about that is that On1 Resize is now built in to On1 Photo RAW. You can see there's a resize module here. So they have all these different kind of sharpening options. So we're just gonna do sharpen for screen, because that's what I'm gonna be sharing this with right now. And there's halo and amount. So let's take the amount up to about 70. Okay, and we'll play with the halo and see what it does, because that actually can really help if it does start to cause halos. All right, this is kind of like your halo management slider. You can make sure that nothing creeps in too much here. All right, so let's uncheck that and then check it. Now look at that. I mean, look at all those little cracks and the bits of sand and stuff just start to pop right off the boot. Before, after, and it's not degrading the detail or the image quality. I mean, that is pretty incredible. Okay, so I like that. I mean, even here in the corner where there's just dark shadow and not much detail, I'm zoomed in here and there's not, you know, there's no visible color noise or anything. So their On1's updates have obviously worked. So thank you, On1, for listening to your customers. Their marketing director actually reached out to me after I made that video and said, hey, if you find anything else or you need anything, let me know and we can chat about the software. So obviously they care about their customers. That is beautiful, because that's what you want out of a RAW processor, or the people behind it, is you want them to listen to the people that use it. You know, you want their agenda to be to fix issues and add features that the people that use it want. So anyway, we'll just call it quits on this for now. Obviously, I normally would take it into Photoshop and Nik Collection and continue to work on a little details, but I think it looks good. They fixed pretty much all the issues that I had with it. I haven't played around with every facet of the program yet, but so far I like it. I think my favorite thing about it is the shadow detail, or the shadow slider, and that the detail holds up incredibly. So bravo to On1 for doing that. I don't know how they do that, because when I take some of these photos side by side in On1 and Lightroom, I'll crank it all the way up in Lightroom and it'll just give me like a smidgen of exposure, and then I'll do it in On1 and it's you know, On1, you should create a hashtag called shadows for days. Let's get that going. Hashtag shadows for days. By the way, On1, if you use that, you know, I wouldn't mind some royalties. That'd be nice. So totally kidding. All right, so I need to go to bed because now I'm breaking out my cheesy jokes. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you have any questions, of course, leave them in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next one. If you would like to stay up to date on all of my latest photography videos and adventures, click the big subscribe button below. And if you would like to find out more about me and how to become a great photographer, visit my website at findingmiddleearth.com.